Hi, everyone. Happy New Year and welcome back into Bible Boot Camp. My name is Derek. We're on episode 6 today, so if you have not had an opportunity to look at the last 5, I encourage you to do so as we're going in chronological order. We are now in the book of Genesis, chapter number 11. In this episode, we are going to talk about the Tower of Babel, which has a very, very good lesson behind it. But before we go forward, I want to go backwards a little bit just to recap the story of Noah, because I believe that that has just such a profound message that we really need to understand and get before moving on. So, if you remember back in the last episode and the episode before that, we began talking about Noah. And Noah's story is a very famous one. Noah's the only righteous man that is left on the earth, and God has decided to wipe out the earth because there's just too much violence, and no one else but Noah is in relationship with God, is following God, is moral. Everyone else is just so violent, is so evil, and the world is just kind of going to waste. So God has decided to use floodwaters to destroy the earth. And when he does so, he selects Noah because once again, he's the only man that's righteous left on earth. And what makes Noah righteous is the fact that he is moral and the fact that he has a relationship with God and the fact that he is obedient to God. So the lesson of Noah is not really about the ark. It's not really about the destruction of the earth. The message of the story of Noah really is the person himself, Noah. It's showing us that if we want to be righteous, if we want to be right in the eyes of God, then we must contain those three things: morality, obedience, and relationship. We need to be moral, no matter if we're the only ones that are moral. In this At this time in the earth, Noah was the only one that was moral, so only he was saved. So it was not popular to be moral back in those days. It was popular to be violent. It was popular to be wicked. Kind of sounds like today, right? Having a moral compass, doing what's right even when it's not popular, having a relationship with God. And how do you have a relationship with God? Right? God's not a physical God. He is a spiritual being. So how do we have a relationship with God? We do that by praying, right? So just talking to God, just like we would communicate with any other person. And also by reading his word and deep diving into his word, like you're doing right now in the Bible boot camp. That's how we have a relationship with God. And finally, obedience. Being obedient, that's probably the most important part, is obedience to God. If God is telling us to do something, to do it, just like God instructed Noah to build the ark, he did so, even when people thought he was crazy, even when it was not the popular thing to do. Noah still did it. Now, if we go into chapter 10 of Genesis, it's going to talk to us about the line of Noah. It's going to talk to us about his three sons and kind of how, his line continued from there. So I do encourage you to go into Genesis chapter 10 just to read about that. But we are going to start off in chapter 11 of Genesis today, which is the story of the Tower of Babel. I'm going to go ahead and read the first 8 verses for us. At one time, all the people of the world spoke the same language and used the same words. As the people migrated east, they found a plain in the land of Babylonia, and they settled there. They began saying to each other, "Let's make bricks and harden them with fire." Then they said, "Come, let's build a great city for ourselves, with a tower that reaches into the sky. This will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the world." But the Lord came down to look at the city and the tower the people were building. "Look," he said, "the people are united, and all speak the same language. After this, nothing they set out to do will be impossible for them. Come, let's go down and confuse the people with different languages. Then they won't be able to understand each other. In that way, the Lord scattered them all over the world, and they stopped building the city. That is why the city was called Babel, because that is where the Lord confused the people with different languages. In this way, he scattered them all over the world. Okay, so if you're like me, when I originally read this story a long time ago, I was a little confused. I was confused because I was like, why would God want to scatter a united group of people? A group of people who are all speaking the same language and they're all united to one task, and that is to build a great city, to build a tower, so that they can all be together. So, in that way, I was a little bit confused. But there's really two big problems with the people wanting to stay all in one place and wanting to build this city and build this tower. And the first reason can be found where we were in the last episode, and that is in Genesis chapter 9. And it's in the first verse. Let me read it for you. It says, God blessed Noah and his sons and told them, multiply and fill all of the earth. So if these people were planning to stay in just one area, that is not going to be in compliance with the covenant that God had with Noah and his sons, which was to go out and fill the world. They would all be confined to this one area. So, number one, it's disobedient because it's against the covenant that God had with Noah and his sons and their descendants. And of course, these people are the descendants of Noah and his sons. So they're in a direct violation of that covenant right away. And number two can be found here. And I'm going to read these verses back out for you. We're going to start in verse 3. They began saying to each other, let's make bricks and harden them with fire. Then they said, come, let us build a great city for ourselves with a tower that reaches the sky. This will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the world. So there lies the second problem. They are wanting to do this for themselves, and they're wanting to become famous for it. That is pride. God calls us to not be prideful, and he calls us instead to be humble, which is the opposite of pride. So the whole reason that they're wanting to do this is to not be scattered amongst the earth, which God commanded in the covenant. And number two, to be famous, and they wanted the city for themselves. So it's the intention that is the problem. The disobedience, number one, and then the intent is the other thing that is the big problem with the people here in Babylonia. Also, notice at the beginning of chapter 11, if we think back to the story of Cain and Abel, when Cain was banished for killing his brother, he went east. And if you remember me telling you, anytime that people leave God's presence, they tend to travel east. Verse 2 here, as the people migrated to the east, they found a plain in the land of Babylonia and settled there. When people are leaving God's presence, they tend to travel east in the Bible. So this is another example of that. They're traveling east because they're doing it for selfish reasons, and they're doing it because they're being disobedient to God. Okay, so the big takeaway from the Tower of Babel, the big takeaway from the episode is, once again, obedience. And number two is not being prideful. We have to instead be humble, show humility, and not do things for ourselves and not be prideful. I hope today's lesson was helpful for you. Make sure that you read the rest of the chapter 11, and when we get together again for episode 7, we will then move on to chapter number 12, which is the call of Abram. See you then.